The Browns thought they were holding a press conference. Instead, they got a revolution. When Shedeur Sanders' $100 million endorsement deal was revealed, right there in front of the cameras, it didn't just shift headlines. It shattered the traditional power structure of the team. Kevin Stefanski, standing on the same stage, wasn't just overshadowed. He was finished. His stunned expression became the viral image of a coach watching his relevance evaporate in real time.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
Sanders had quietly redefined what it means to be a rookie in the NFL. With cross-industry deals, brand control clauses, and a digital empire of his own, he entered the league not as a hopeful player, but as a media titan. The Browns weren't ready. Stefanski wasn't ready. And in failing to evolve with the moment, they handed over the narrative and possibly the franchise to a quarterback who's already bigger than the system. Shedeur Sanders just detonated the power balance in the NFL, and it happened on live television. During what was supposed to be a routine Browns press conference, he dropped a bombshell, a $100 million endorsement deal that spans apparel, energy drinks, automotive, cryptocurrency, complete with clauses giving him control over his personal brand. The room changed. The narrative shifted. And Kevin Stefanski's career? Many saw it as over. When the announcement dropped, Stefanski's reaction went viral. The visible shock, the forced composure, the realization that he had just been publicly outmaneuvered by a quarterback who, without ever putting on pads in a regular season, had already redefined his own agency. That reaction became symbolic. A coach losing authority in front of players, media, and fans all at once. That's the cost of underestimating a quarterback who came in not just with talent, but with intellect, branding chops, and business leverage. The endorsement deal itself wasn't just generous. It was masterful in structure. Sanders made sure to diversify across industries, building a portfolio that doesn't depend on NFL contracts. He secured control clauses, ownership stakes, branding rights. He established that his revenue streams and his brand would rise on his own terms, not at the whim of team decisions. That flips the traditional model on its head. Traditionally, franchises, and by extension, coaches, hold power because the athlete depends on them for opportunity, income, identity. Sanders came in with so much external value that the franchise looked smaller by comparison. The Browns' internal dysfunction became exposed in that moment. The optics revealed ownership interference, misalignment, a coaching staff caught flat-foot, a broken communication chain. They had no plan to prepare a coach for the moment their quarterback essentially stole the spotlight. That alone shows organizational weakness. Leadership that can't anticipate the ambitions of the athletes they brought in is not leadership. It's reactive management. Stefanski's humiliation wasn't about a bad call or a losing game. It was about relevancy. The NFL is evolving. The quarterbacks being drafted now aren't just athletes. They are brands, media creators, social influencers. They arrive with voice and presence. When a coach is confronted with someone who already commands more media weight and financial leverage before his first start and is forced to respond, he's not in charge anymore. That's what happened. The coin flip in authority goes the way of the player. In that moment, Stefanski's job security crumbled. Many media voices seized on the moment, calling his career in Cleveland effectively over, not because of performance, but because he had no answers, no counter, no strategy. He looked like someone about to be unseated. The repercussions rippled outward almost immediately. Talk around the league shifted. Front offices began worrying not just about playbooks, injuries, and contracts, but branding strategies, athlete autonomy, marketing alignment. This is no longer a side consideration. It's core to roster construction and team identity. Sanders made it clear. He's not waiting for permission. By timing the announcement during training camp, he controlled the media cycle. He forced the organization to respond publicly in real time. That's power. That's agency. That's influence. He didn't just sign deals, he shifted the paradigm. That kind of move threatens coaching hegemony. It threatens franchises built on top-down authority. It signals to upcoming quarterbacks and agents. You don't have to kneel to the system. You can bring your own leverage. You can carry media weight into your first season. You can shape your path rather than adapting to theirs. The economic stakes are also huge. Sanders' deal alone is projected to generate revenue not just for himself, but for the franchise. Merchandise, ticket sales, increased exposure, partnership interest, all potentially rising when your quarterback is a brand magnet. But resistance to the new influence puts that upside at risk. If the Browns refuse to lean into his control, they may lose both the intangible and tangible benefits. Either Cleveland rebuilds around Sanders' influence, or they risk collapsing around it. We're already hearing speculation about Stefanski's replacement, about whether Sanders will demand greater structural control, or even whether he becomes disillusioned enough to request a trade. And none of those scenarios is hypothetical. They're real possibilities emerging from this crisis. The long-term influence on the NFL cannot be overstated. If Sanders succeeds in wielding brand power this early, a wave of rookies may enter the league with pre-established platforms, sponsorships, and leverage. Teams will need to adjust scouting, contracts, coaching models, leadership approaches, all to compete in an ecosystem where authority is no longer top-down. Players will push for more control clauses, brand autonomy, cross-industry partnerships. That's a fundamental shift. Cleveland, caught reacting, now has to decide, do they adapt or collapse? Can they restructure their organization to support, rather than suppress, Sanders' influence? Do they align coaching, ownership, marketing, media strategy under a new, athlete-empowered paradigm? Or is the franchise locked into defending a traditional model that's already crumbling? At stake is not just a season, but the Browns' reputation for decades ahead. If they botch this era, they'll look like they failed to see the future they invited. If they embrace it, they might become a blueprint for how franchises reinvent themselves in a new NFL era. Kevin Stefanski's career didn't end because of wins or losses. It ended because he couldn't contain the new power that walked in his building. Shedeur Sanders' $100 million deal was not just a headline. It was a turning point. The NFL shifted in Cleveland that day. The question now is which franchises will survive in this new world, and which will be left behind. Let me know what you think. Should Cleveland dismantle their old structure and rebuild around Sanders' influence? Or is this too far a departure from tradition? Drop your take. The ripple from that press conference didn't just stop at Cleveland's front door. It echoed across NFL offices, media houses, locker rooms, and endorsement boards everywhere. Once Shedeur Sanders dropped that $100 million deal and watched the coach flinch live, the blueprint changed. Players, agents, franchises all saw it. The balance didn't tilt. It flipped. Because what occurred in that moment exposed something vital. Authority in football is no longer just about who runs the huddle. It's about who controls the narrative, the brand, the threads behind the scenes. A quarterback who walks into a franchise with an endorsement portfolio rivaling what many veterans can only dream of? That was unthinkable until Shedeur made it real. And now, the Browns are scrambling. They're trying to patch together a response. They're trying to reassert order. But in the press conference's aftermath, the organizational dysfunction became obvious. The ownership factions. The coaching staff caught off guard. The front office scrambling to reconceive what role a quarterback like Shedeur should play. And amid all that, Stefanski's standing eroded. You can't hold your players' respect if your authority is publicly questioned. You can't survive a moment like that without serious structural damage. Every rumor the media spins, every leaked account of internal meetings, every front-page narrative now revolves around whether Stefanski is coach of a team or coach of a brand. Because that crisis is real. The Browns now face a choice: attempt to push back against what Shedeur represents, or rebuild around it. And the fact that this deal happened during training camp is telling. It wasn't off-season noise. It wasn't an end-of-season contract bump. It was deliberate timing. It forced reactions. It ensured maximum visibility. That's not a rookie marketing play. That's a strategic move in a game that's bigger than football. Meanwhile, Kevin Stefanski's legacy is unraveling in real time, not because of a single bad game, but because he didn't read the room or the shift. The NFL still has room for coaching adapters, those who see a rising star and integrate them. But a coach who gets blindsided by his own quarterback's move? That's poison in today's media climate. That's a leadership blemish that's impossible to erase once viral. No one in Cleveland's building looked ready for this. Not ownership, not the front office, not Stefanski. And that lack of readiness now signals weakness. Other franchises are watching, reevaluating their own quarterback rooms. If a rookie can walk in with this kind of leverage, what does that do to your staff? To your contract clauses? To your marketing department? To your coach's authority? To your expectations of players across the roster? This changes scout reports, not just on-field skills, but off-field influence. How active is his brand? How many followers? How many crossover interests? How many sponsorship potentials? Because if your star player brings that much outside gravity, you have to manage it. You can't act like it doesn't factor into contract negotiation or locker room stability. Sanders' move forced that reckoning. By the time he stepped off stage, the old hierarchies in Cleveland had already begun to collapse. The dominant narrative was no longer how will he play, but can Cleveland contain him? And the answer was already being drafted in social feeds, in media hot takes, in league power boards. One by one, coaches who once built their fate on controlling personalities are now vulnerable. A quarterback with brand power doesn't negotiate the same way. He doesn't tolerate constraints imposed by ideologues. He demands a voice. He expects a say. If a coach resists that, there's friction. If a coach's ego resists that, that coach won't stand long. Stefanski's reaction made visible that resistance. It caught the eyes of every journalist, every fan, every executive. His discomfort became evidence. His unease became his downfall. If he had been calm, collected, even supportive, the narrative might have shifted. But he wasn't. He looked taken off guard. He looked squeezed. He looked exposed. And, in that exposure, a generational shift registered. You can't walk into a league that's defined by seasons, games, and tape, and survive a move like that unless your infrastructure changes immediately. Coaches must be brand literate. Front offices must integrate media strategy into roster planning. Ownership must balance revenue, legacy, and player autonomy. There's no separating sports from influence anymore. Cleveland's failure will be judged not on whether they win games, but on whether they adapt their structure to this new reality. If they resist, they'll be the case study in franchise irrelevancy. If they pivot, embrace Shedeur's power, build organizational architecture around it, reconstitute roles, they might emerge not just as a team revived, but as a league benchmark for athlete-empowered franchise models. But the path is narrow. One misstep, and the damage becomes identity-shaping. If they fire Stefanski too quickly, it looks reactive and unstable. If they keep him too long, it looks like weakness. The front office must behave like architects now, not constructors. They must dismantle old hierarchies quietly, strategically, and rebuild with clarity. Sanders' influence is already bigger than the Browns. His brand, his endorsements, his narrative, they transcend jersey color. And when a quarterback has more influence than his franchise's promotional arm, the franchise becomes a component in his empire, not the other way around. That's uncomfortable for teams long accustomed to dictating relationships. But it's the new paradigm. And Cleveland's moment to scare or pioneer isn't tomorrow. It's now. In coming weeks, we'll see what path they choose. Do they sanitize the narrative, quiet this, or restructure? We'll see whether Stefanski is relieved of duties or allowed to fade out. We'll watch whether the front office aligns its media, creative, marketing arms around Sanders, or continues viewing him as a disruptive variable. We'll learn how the roster reacts, whether teammates shift loyalty, whether coaches adjust authority, whether the locker room fractures or consolidates. Whichever way it goes, one thing's clear. The $100 million deal wasn't just a payday. It was a referendum. On control, on branding, on evolution, on who holds power in the modern NFL. And just like the press conference moment, The real drama is still playing out. This is more than a franchise crisis. It's a league moment, a protest about what it means to be a quarterback in 2025. A reminder that the game isn't just 11 men on turf anymore. It's influence, story, brand, optics. When history writes this season, it won't remember the stats as much as the shift. And that shift already started that day in Cleveland. The ripple effects from that $100 million Shedeur Sanders announcement didn't just stick to Twitter timelines and Reddit threads. They detonated the franchise's internal logic. Because what this wasn't was just a flashy contract. It wasn't some typical rookie hype cycle. This was a public, calculated shift in power. And the Browns were caught completely flat-footed. The whole world watched a head coach get sidelined, not by injury or firing, but by irrelevance. On live TV, Kevin Stefanski didn't fumble a snap. He fumbled control. And in today's NFL, that might be the final play in your tenure. Let's be real, coaches have survived losing seasons, brutal rebuilds, even quarterback controversies. But being humiliated live, in front of national media, while your quarterback becomes the face of a corporate empire, that's a new level of defeat. Stefanski's blank stare, the stiffened posture, the visible confusion. It wasn't just a reaction. It was a confirmation. Confirmation that leadership had already shifted, and no one sent him the memo. This wasn't a player doing too much. It was an organization doing far too little. The front office clearly didn't anticipate the scale of media dominance. Ownership didn't prep for it. Marketing wasn't coordinated. No one seemed to have been briefed on how Sanders was about to rewrite the rookie narrative before even taking a snap. Which only reinforces the core problem. Cleveland, as an organization, is stuck in an outdated model. One where coaches lead, players follow, and the brand belongs to the shield. But Shedeur isn't part of that system. He is his own system. He didn't ask to be a brand. He built one, strategically, over years. He arrived not just with a name, but with a following, a market plan, and a vision. And if the Browns thought they could fold that into their usual rookie template, they got outplayed in a press conference before the season even started. It's not just about Stefanski's career potentially ending. It's about the Browns' identity collapsing under the weight of modern sports reality. Because Shedeur's not just a quarterback. He's an enterprise. He has media influence, endorsement revenue, social capital, and, most dangerously for the old guard, independence. Financially and publicly, he doesn't need the Browns to validate him. That upends everything. For decades, NFL franchises operated like kingdoms. Coaches ruled. Players were subjects. Rookies had to earn voice, earn spotlight, earn power. But Shedeur's deal made it clear. He doesn't need to wait. The financial independence gives him autonomy. The media presence gives him leverage. And that right there is why Stefanski lost the room. The optics are brutal. You've got a quarterback being courted by Fortune 500 brands, while your coach is stuck in control the locker room mode. You've got young players watching this unfold, realizing that power in the NFL doesn't start in the playbook anymore. It starts on your phone, in your content, in your contracts. Stefanski looked outdated not because of his game plan, but because he didn't realize the game had changed. And here's the part that really stings. The Browns could have been ahead of this. They could have leaned into Shedeur's momentum, restructured their strategy to center around his influence, built a media-savvy, player-empowered franchise model. But instead, they tried to fit a 2025 quarterback into a 2005 system. It's no wonder the seams burst on live TV. Now they're staring down the barrel of a full-on identity crisis. Do you side with the past, with the coach, the hierarchy, the structure? Or do you rebuild around the future, around Shedeur, around player empowerment, around modern influence? Because you can't do both. One vision has to win. And right now, the clock is ticking. Media outlets are circling. Analysts are calling for Stefanski's head, not because he's a bad coach, but because he doesn't fit anymore. He doesn't represent the direction players are moving in. And as long as Shedeur is on that roster, the spotlight belongs to him. If the Browns want any shot at salvaging this new era, they'll have to do something radical. Not just fire Stefanski, but reorganize the entire chain of command. That's what this moment demands. It's not just about play calling anymore. It's about culture, about modernity, about whether you're willing to accept that your quarterback might get more press than your franchise, and use that to your advantage instead of resisting it. Because make no mistake, resisting this wave is a losing game. Shedeur isn't the outlier. He's the prototype. And if Cleveland can't see that, they'll be the case study in what happens when a franchise clings to a dying structure. The NFL is moving fast, and player autonomy is leading the charge. Between social media dominance, personal branding, and cross-industry control, today's athletes are walking startups with cleats. If your leadership doesn't know how to manage that, you're toast. So where does that leave the Browns? They can double down on tradition. Fire up the team over ego rhetoric. Try to put Sanders in a box. That'll last until the next press conference. Or they can evolve. Build an ecosystem where his influence is harnessed, not hidden. Bring in leadership that understands that influence is currency now. Realign the franchise to support, not suppress, the next generation of player entrepreneurs. And Stefanski? He's already become the symbol of resistance to change. Fair or not, that press conference locked in the narrative. That's what happens in a media-first league. Perception is performance. This is a test, not just for the Browns, but for the NFL. Because how the league handles Shedeur Sanders could shape how every young, branded, financially independent athlete sees their future. Is the NFL ready to treat players like partners? Or will it cling to control until it breaks? Cleveland doesn't have time to play it safe. If they stall, they lose Shedeur. If they fight him, they lose the locker room. If they ignore him, they lose the media. And if they lose all three, they lose their relevance. So yeah, a $100 million deal just ended a coaching career. But it also launched a new era. The question is, who's ready for it? And more importantly, who isn't? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do the Browns rebuild around Shedeur, or does the league push back on this player-driven model? And if you're into breaking down the power plays behind the press conferences, make sure you're subscribed. This saga's just getting started.